get into this major scale nonsense. Essentially, to start off with, we have the idea of scales, collections of notes. We have pentatonic scales with five notes, of course. Diatonic scales with 7. Different types of diatonic scales based off that major one. Obviously, it has all the modes. We'll get into that, but like the harmonic minor. Or the melodic minor. Or the diminished. Okay, so those are all different sort of variants of scales, if you will. A lot of them are diatonic scales, obviously scales that have 7 notes, and a couple of them are pentatonic. You have other ones, octonic scales, blah, blah, hexatonic, whatever. The most important one, obviously, is the major scale. If I sort of evolve it downwards, I get the pentatonic scale by taking some notes away. And I can make it more complex, obviously, by adding in chromaticism. And so, you know, there's a lot of things you can do to scales after the fact to make them a lot more interesting. But to start off with, that is the first step, is just be like, okay, I've got pentatonic scales, I've got diatonic scales, and I've got a couple different families in there, the major scale and all of its modes, the melodic minor and all of its modes, and the harmonic minor. Those are the 3 big ones. And I've got the diminished scale, sort of symmetrical scale on its own. That's its own animal, so that's why it's on its own over here. Organize your mind like a filing cabinet where you put things in file folders with little tabs. You can go like, boom, that's the information I want. Trust me, when you're improvising, you want to bring it up really quickly. That makes a lot more sense than be looking around in a big pile of papers, right? So it just becomes a nightmare. So negative. Next is obviously, after I kind of figure out the idea of scales, we have the idea of step patterns. Right, so I'm going to take this scale from the vertical position and blow it up onto one string. There's a whole step, another whole step, half, whole, half. That becomes important because when I see alterations to the step pattern, that's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. Well, if I'm 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, 1. As soon as I alter that step pattern, I get a minor scale. And I could do the same thing for all 7, get the Dorian mode. I'd lower the 3rd and the 7th, right, to get the Mixolydian mode. I'd lower the 7th. So, you know, that gets a little bit more into the music theory, but you start to understand that the step pattern, the distances between these notes really matters, okay? So don't skip over that piece of information. Sort of just ramp up to be like, okay, I'm starting to understand this step pattern stuff. And once you get there, of course, just sort of mapping out the major scale on one string, I can now break these into positions. Right, so when I go from 1 to 1 here, the Ionian mode, 2 to 2, Dorian, right, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, that's Aeolian. That's Locrian, of course, and I'm back to the root. The starting position, right? So the Ionian position, that right there is incredibly important. Now, you saw me do it basically broken down on just each position moving up the fretboard, but I can also do it in place. That's when I start off the first note, right? Then there's the second note. Oh, 3rd. I think you get the idea. We're going to go through this McLaughlin exercise in the next week's lesson, if you will. But right there is, you know, that's a huge part. And once you sort of get comfortable with that, then it's time to move on to the idea that you have this classical method, of course. You have this sort of horizontal method to sort of break down the fretboard, but you also have 3 notes per string. Which leads you to basically be like, oh, look, I can sort of take these shapes and put them together just one string. Oh, that was Dorian. Oh, I'm into Phrygian now, back into Dorian, back into Ionian. Whoops, missed it there. Right, so you get the idea. I have to know where I am, and of course I can start to play them so that I just start moving through the shapes. I don't just sit there and constantly do this. Even if I'm going to the next position, right? No, what I do is I start to ascend, move into the next position. Right, and you're going to keep doing that process so that you can just consistently play all over the fretboard. You're like Mixolydian, sliding down to Lydian. Oh, there's Phrygian. Oh, that's the Dorian position. I'm going to use this classical method. Oh, there's the major pentatonic. Nice. There's the minor pentatonic. Major scale, 3 notes per string. Again, you're going to just keep doing that. Let's jump over here, 3rd position, pentatonic. Pentatonic in the 5th position there, and you're like... Okay, so listen, just moving through the pentatonic scale, the classical method, and connecting it together with 3 notes per string. Notice those create the Bermuda's Triangle of insanity, and it's very difficult to just switch from one to the next at the beginning, but trust me, over time, you start to just freely draw from them, and of course, there should be other obvious ones, like just on one string, of course, until you're on 2 strings. And don't forget that it just starts changing there around Aeolian. And then you get like all the weird ones. But again, just doing it on 2 strings kind of situation, then 3 strings, then of course, like I was saying, just ascending at will. Back down. When you're up again. Back down. Okay, just like that, where you're basically consistently just moving through the shapes, thinking to yourself, okay, I'm in the Aeolian position. I'm using 3 notes per string. Oh, next one, I want to use the classical method. So you're like going to stop on 2 notes. You're like, well, which one does that belong to? And that becomes the first question. And no, I'm not going to tell you. No, I'm not going to show you. That's the kind of stuff you should be doing in your practice sessions. When you get burned and you're like, oh, I lost it there. You like start here and be like, what is the next sort of sequence of notes in there? You're like, that's part of the Ionian position, right? You're like, right? You're like, okay. I guess I am showing you one variant, but that's my point. You see there, you might have been like, oh, I want to do just the classical method. You're like, that's Dorian. You see what I mean? And you can then start to really mess with it after that. You can be like, oh, chromaticism. Starting to factor in the harmonic minor there instead of the, you know, the minor pentatonic or something like that, or do a combination. I really did all 3 because this first section, that comes from obviously that Dorian pentatonic. And then I just started factoring in the notes from the harmonic minor situation there. And of course that covers that whole section there, which is number 1. Know the shapes, if you will, or how to move between them essentially on 1 string across vertically and across diagonally using the classical methods and 3 notes per string, right? And then sort of gang up the strings so you're basically practicing them in groups, like 2 or 3 or 4, whatever it is, and then just work up to moving through all of them at will. And then, of course, start to integrate other systems. So you're like, the pentatonic into the Aeolian mode there, right? And just keep practicing things like that. It's going to be really good. Obviously, you can immediately factor in these more hybrid sort of pentatonic scales. There's nothing to stop you from throwing in that chromaticism. Oh, there's from the major scale again. Moving down now, maybe moving up into the major scale. Back into Locrian before ending in Ionian there. And there, that kind of covers the whole idea of just sort of understanding where you are, using the scales to basically move around, and then ultimately ending in a position and being like, okay, I want to start with 3 notes per string next. I did 2 notes here. So I'm now going to use the classical method, and boom, you're off to the classical method. Then you stop and you're like, okay, the next thing I want to do is like the whole step pattern or whatever it is. You're like, you see what I'm saying? Each thing sort of forces you to be like, oh, I'm going to use the whole step pattern here. I'm going to use the whole step pattern from here at Mixolydian, maybe. So you see what I mean? There's a thought process going in there. It's not just mindlessly practicing through the scale shapes. You're really trying to be like, okay, starting off in Ionian there. Oh, I mean, again, in this case, I'd be seeing this as Ionian, 3 notes per string till I get to that pentatonic. Then I'm like, might as well keep going with the pentatonic and Phrygian. And then I'm like, oh, Lydian, 3 notes per string into Mixolydian, into the minor pentatonic or the Aeolian position to just end it off, right? Finally ending up in Mixolydian here, but I get, I don't want to sort of beat this into the ground. That is when you're practicing the exercises going on in the background. You're like, where am I? What's the position I'm playing in? What system am I using? 3 notes per string, the classical method, the minor pentatonic. Am I doing diatonic scales? Am I using variants of that? Am I using the harmonic minor, the melodic minor? What is it? Am I adding chromaticism? Start to actually think about it and call it out. And then when you're like, oh, I'm hearing that right then and there in an actual improvisation, you'll just do it and you'll be like, damn, yes. You got to sort of push the faders up at the same time. That means making your mind do the supervisory stuff while you're playing rather than just sort of playing through things where it's kind of more on autopilot, which is not a great situation. Right, and that basically, I'm not going to take it any further than that on the rudiment stuff. Let's just recap. Obviously, the different types of scales, the pentatonic scales, into the diatonic scales, right? And then I'm like, oh, there's a whole tone one. Minor 3rd step sequence. Well, that puts me at Lydian. Right, so knowing all of the positions and whatnot, but of course, just starting off with the idea that you're going to break the fretboard down into ranges, right? And be like, okay, that's what this is, like this. That's what it is, like this. Again, you're like, knowing how to play those in multiple different sort of configurations is going to be incredibly useful. Groupings. Concentrate on the ones that are symmetrical. And then add the non-symmetrical ones. Right, and of course, sort of work up speed, that's a great way to do alternate picking. There's economy picking there. I was doing a bit of both. Basically, doing economy picking when I'm going up and down between strings, the high E and the B, but of course using alternate picking to do this. Transfer to the next position. And I'm not even doing a very good job now because I'm trying to talk and do it and think about it at the same time, so I'm just going to stop there, but you get my point. is these are little microcosms for you to practice a whole bunch of stuff without breaking the bank. You're like major scales. I like doing stuff like this, where I kind of spider my way down. Okay, so another really great exercise there. Again, sort of combining the ideas together so that you get the full maximum practice. And of course, factoring in the minor pentatonic scale. And then last but not least, as you heard me do in the example, basically work on melodies, sort of work it out, you know? Is worth a lot more than like, that's cool too, but really, trust me, getting it right with the slow stuff is way more difficult with the rakes and the slides and the vibrato. Don't forget that. You like start with a note, a bit of vibrato, then I guess I should talk about that for 2 seconds. The idea here that is just always, again, doing up and down. No, right? Start with one. Milk it a bit, right? Changing the tempo a bit. See, I snuck in another major scale there. I thought it sounded cool, and then I ducked right back out because I knew I could superimpose two of these scale systems together. That's me doing it at the very end, so I didn't actually cause pandemonium with people being like, hey, what are you doing there? Don't do that. But you can hear, you can start to mess with these scale sequence and substitute another one in where one is supposed to be, and then combine them together like that to get some really killer sounds, right? Just like arpeggios, scales, chords, and arpeggios work very similar in that respect, where you can start to superimpose other scales and get a really killer effect with tension and release. So try to interject feeling into your playing. Don't just go into, pure autopilot. Use them as the template. Oh, I'm in Phrygian. That's Dorian. Oh, that's the major into, yes, Locrian. And that's me basically doing the major scale as the classical method. That's using the pentatonic scale. Again, major scale plus elements of the pentatonic scale. I think you're starting to get the idea. That's what you're trying to do when you're practicing major scales, is combine everything together and not just do purely scalar exercises. Instead, use it as a template to put the notes together into melodies. Okay, and once you start doing that more and more often, you'll be like, these two scale systems work awesome together. Number one. Number two, vastly improves your ability to break down the fretboard. And number three, gives you more tools in the toolbox to work with. You're like, nice. You're like, oh, Locrian mode, 3 notes per string there. Into the whole step sequence from the minor pentatonic scale. That obviously opens up some massive doors, and now you're playing just like guys like Jakey Lee and countless other sort of 80s shredders, because they're the master of basically blending major scale fragments and pentatonic fragments together. And obviously just work up with the alternate picking until you can get it fast, but don't skip over. You can see me doing at slower speeds, which I would recommend this idea of doing the economy picking at slower speeds. That is actually surprisingly hard. Maybe it's just me, but I can do it really fast and it's not so bad. But as soon as I try to slow it down, and that right there is the last piece I want to talk about, recognizing your weaknesses again and being like, okay, I'm not very good at just sort of, playing it slowly, right? It's a tension situation with my hand or whatever. Right, so you just keep choking through it until you get it, and of course try to orient your mind to be like, okay, don't just try to keep grinding. Slow down and be like, what is it about what I'm doing that's really starting to stop me? And then of course look for a way to correct that. Most times you're just using too much power, right? You're using too much power with the pick, and I do it all the time and it just kills it. So you got to be very light. And of course, this other idea of the pick falling to the next string tends to be the real secret behind economy picking. So there it is. I think we'll end the video there. Yeah, that's enough punishment for the rudiment stuff. Obviously, I covered a lot of ground. Just, try to absorb as much as you can. It's a little hodgepodge, I get it, but it's kind of hard to explain this stuff without it making really boring. Instead, be like, okay, be experimental, use different shapes together, use the different positions, and of course, the different sort of arrangements. Classical method, into 3 notes per string. Okay, so again, practicing like that, where you're like, okay, start off with this first one, and then jump up to the next one, 3 notes per string. And then you're like, okay, pentatonic scale. Move to the next position. And keep going ad hoc until basically your fingers fall off. Mint, thanks for joining me. I appreciate every single one of you. Good luck on your practice sessions. Think when you're playing. Don't just go on autopilot. Really think, where am I? What position is this? What system am I using? Once you start doing that, everything gets easier. We'll see you in the next one.